In this video, we're going to talk about how to put together your letters to create your word art or letter art in InDesign. So first step is obviously opening up InDesign. Once you're in InDesign, we need to create a new document. So you can either go to File, New, or click Create New. InDesign is different from Photoshop and Illustrator, where you're able to create a nice page layout before you actually begin putting things together. So we're going to look at how to lay things out before placing our letters to get accurate spacing and sizing for each of those letters. We're going to set up the size of our document first. So under units, I'm going to change it to inches and set it to just a regular paper size. So I have it set to 8.5 by 11. And I'm going to set my orientation to landscape so that it is wider and able to fit my letters going across. For your final project, definitely decide how many letters you have, the placement of them, and what size and scale is going to work the best for your main document. So again, for now, just 8.5 by 11 works. And then it's going to take a second to load, and then you have your screen that's going to show up. And you need to decide, first of all, how you want your spacing and the placement of your letters to look. So I want my letters to be pretty much centered in the middle of my page. So I'm going to drag these guidelines or rulers down from the top to create the placement of my letters and where I want them to go. So again, I want them centered. If you want them more towards the top of your page, you could just bring that guideline to the top instead. So to create those rulers, you just click and drag from the top and it will pull them down. Next, I'm going to create the placement of my frames, which is where I want to put each of my letters. So on the left side, this is where the toolbar is found. There's also some additional options at the top that you can go to. We're mainly going to be working with the frame on the left. So I'm going to grab my frame. It's the square with the X through it. Right below, there's also a square, but this one does not have an X through it. That's called the rectangle tool, and that's what we would use to fill an area with color. But the frame is just going to be basically a placeholder for your image so that you are able to space things out before bringing pictures into your document. So I'm going to start by using my guidelines here and click and drag for where I want my first letter, and that's going to place my frame. Before I place my letter into my frame, I want to get everything figured out and everything placed on the page first. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this frame. So I'm going to hit Command C on my computer to copy, and then Command V will paste a second frame. I want a little bit of spacing to be between my letters. So I'm going to line this up in between my guidelines first and then decide how much spacing I would like before I let go and move on to pasting another letter. So I'm going to be spelling out the word smile, which means I need to have 5 frames. So I'm going to continue copying and pasting and lining these up. So Command V for my third. Now when I go to place my third, I want to make sure that the spacing is exactly the same between my first 2 and my third. So I'm going to line this up until I see those 2 green arrows at the bottom in between the spacing down here, which is going to tell me that the spacing is the same between each frame. So I'm going to stop there and move on to my 4th frame. Get that lined up, make sure that the Smart Guide or that little green arrow at the bottom is showing that the placement and the spacing is the same. Now I have one more letter to place, but I did run out of room. So what I'm going to do is highlight these letters or these frames and shrink them down so that I do have enough space to add my last letter. So to highlight them, I'm going to just click off in this space outside of my frames and drag all the way across every single frame. This is going to select all of them together. At this point, I'm going to click in the corner and drag them so that they're a little bit smaller and I have enough space for my last frame. So now if I were to paste my frame again, it's going to be a lot bigger than the rest of my frames since this one wasn't resized. So instead of pasting again, I'm going to delete that I'm going to click on one of these smaller frames, copy it again, paste it, and then just double check the spacing is the same. So I have those smart guides that show up and they're telling me that the spacing is identical to the rest of my frames. Now you'll notice that I do have this little gap or this little space on the edge. I want to make sure that these stretch all the way to the outside. So I'm going to highlight these and extend them so that it hits the edge of that purple guideline, telling me that these are all equally spaced. Now, like I said before, I wanted these to be centered. So while I have them all selected, I'm going to move them down until the center line shows up in between all of my frames. So this is telling me that everything is perfectly centered. So I'm going to let go of that. And then at this point, if these rulers that we used at the beginning are kind of in your way or distracting and you want to get rid of them, you can click and drag to highlight them and hit delete, or just try to line up your mouse, click on it, and hit delete. So now I have all of my frames figured out. They're placed exactly how I want. A couple things to think about placement-wise for your final project is, first of all, do you want some of these to be higher and some lower? Maybe every other one is higher. And again, these smart guides will show up telling you the placement is the same as you move them. You could also maybe organize these diagonally. So I could try to line these up so that they're at an angle. And my smart guides, again, are going to help me to make sure that everything is equal and telling me that the placement is the same as how I had things set up previously. But I'm going to go ahead and undo this to get it back to them all being lined up across. And I'm going to place my images now. I'm clicking on my first frame, going to File, Place, and then selecting my first letter. So my first letter is going to be my S. So I'm going to place my S. I double clicked for it to place. Now you'll notice that the full S is not showing up. That's because right now my image is a lot bigger than my frame. So keep in mind that your frame and your image are two separate things. Think of it like a picture frame. Your picture frame and the picture itself are separate, so you can move the frame and picture together, or you can move just the picture within the frame to get it to a different spot. If I click this little circle that shows up where there's that hand, it's going to outline my entire image. So if I zoom out here, you can see this orange box, this orange bounding box shows up on the outside. And that's showing me the outline of my entire picture. So this little white circle is called the content grabber. That is the best way, or really the only way, to select your picture separate from the frame. So if you want to move the picture to a different spot within your frame, you need to select the content grabber. If you want to select just the frame, you can click off of your picture and then click on the outside of the image, and that's going to move the frame. Now, instead of clicking on the content grabber and trying to shrink my picture till it fits, an easier way to get this spacing and size to scale is to right-click on the content grabber, go to Fitting, and then hit Fill Frame Proportionately. So this is going to automatically shrink my image so that it fits the box the best that it can. Now my frame is set to be a little bit shorter than my image, so I can move this up and down to get it to a spot that I'm happy with. Another thing that I want to mention about InDesign is that it's usually used for magazines, page layout, newspapers, yearbooks, things that have large file sizes because they're using a lot of pictures. So the setting that is automatically set for each image is setting it to a low quality. That's going to make it slightly blurry just when we're viewing in InDesign. If you were to save this as a JPEG, it's going to update the quality. It's going to be clear when you save it. But if you want to make sure that everything is clear as you're viewing your image to see what it's actually going to look like, since we're using a small amount of pictures, it's okay to set this to a high quality. So we're going to go up to the top of the screen and hit View. And then you're going to go down to see where it's at. display performance, so that's down towards the bottom here. And then you're going to set that to high quality display. That will change the quality of your image so that you're viewing it in a high quality, so it's not blurry at all or pixelated. Now that I have my first letter in, I'm going to go ahead and demo adding one more letter, and then you can go through and give this a try yourself. So again, I'm going up to File, Place, finding my next letter, which is an M. Same thing, when it loads, it's way larger than my frame. So I'm going to right click on the content grabber, go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionately. So now I have my M selected. And I'm going to change that as well. So I'm going to View, Display Performance, High Quality Display is already selected. So the nice thing too is that once you have your display performance set, it's going to keep it set the entire time. So you actually don't have to come back here for every image, but I wanted to make sure that you're able to see the high quality display is always set. So go through, add all of your letters. When you're finished,